On a scorching afternoon in the New Mexico Territory, a widowed father struggles to keep his daughter alive in a camp by a dried-up creek bed, with nothing but a broken-down wagon and the clothes on their backs. Desperation has become his shadow, hunger his constant companion, and hope feels like a luxury he can no longer afford. But when they stumble upon a stranded woman with a damaged wagon wheel in the middle of a dust storm, he offers to help, even though it means using the last of his tools and risking the little time he has left to find work. What he doesn't know is that the woman is Catherine Whitmore, owner of the largest and most powerful ranch in the entire territory, and the kindness he's about to show her is the very thing that will change his and his daughter's lives forever. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun beat down mercilessly on the outskirts of Dust Creek, turning the earth into cracked, thirsty clay. Caleb Morgan wiped the sweat from his brow with a threadbare bandana, his calloused hands trembling slightly, not from the heat, but from exhaustion that had settled deep into his bones. Beside him, his daughter Lucy sat in the shade of their broken-down wagon, her small frame hunched over a tattered book she'd read 100 times before. Her dress, once white, was now the color of dust and desperation. They'd been living like this for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the fever took his wife Sarah. 3 weeks since the bank seized their small homestead for missed payments. 3 weeks of wandering from town to town, looking for work that never seemed to materialize. Caleb had been a skilled carpenter once, a man who could build a barn frame in 2 days or craft furniture that lasted generations. But out here, in this unforgiving territory, skills didn't matter if no one was willing to hire you. The camp they'd set up by the dried creek bed wasn't much. Just a small fire pit surrounded by stones, a few pots and pans, and the wagon that had become their only shelter. The wagon itself was barely holding together. One of the wheels had a crack running through the hub, and Caleb knew it was only a matter of time before it gave out completely. But replacing it would cost money he didn't have, and fixing it required tools he'd already sold just to buy flour and dried beans. "Daddy?" Lucy's soft voice broke through his thoughts. She looked up at him with those wide, trusting eyes, the same eyes her mother had. "Are we going to find a house soon?" Caleb's chest tightened. He forced a smile, crouching down beside her and brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "Soon, sweetheart. I promise. Just need to find the right opportunity." It was a lie, and he hated himself for it. But what else could he tell her? That they were one bad day away from starving? That every door he'd knocked on in Dust Creek had been slammed in his face? That the foreman at the lumber yard had taken one look at his worn boots and hollow cheeks and told him they didn't need drifters? Lucy nodded, accepting his answer the way she always did, with a trust that broke his heart a little more each day. She returned to her book, and Caleb stood, staring out at the barren landscape stretching endlessly before them. The town of Dust Creek shimmered in the distance, its buildings wavering in the heat like a mirage. He'd heard there might be work at one of the ranches, cattle drives, fence mending, anything. But the ranches were miles away, and without a proper wagon, getting there with Lucy would be nearly impossible. His stomach growled, a sharp reminder that they'd eaten the last of their beans that morning. He had maybe $2 left, enough for one more supply run if he was careful. After that, he didn't want to think about after that. Caleb walked to the back of the wagon and pulled out his toolbox, a battered wooden crate that held the last remnants of his trade, a hammer, a few nails, a rusted saw, and a hand drill. He had already sold his better tools weeks ago. These were all he had left, and he guarded them like treasure because without them, he had no way to earn even the smallest bit of money. He was just about to check the wagon wheel again when Lucy suddenly stood up, pointing toward the horizon. "Daddy, look! There's dust coming." Caleb turned, squinting against the sun. Sure enough, a cloud of dust was rising in the distance, moving fast along the old trail that cut through the desert. As it grew closer, he could make out the shape of a wagon, a fine one with polished wood and a canvas top. But something was wrong. The wagon was tilting awkwardly, moving in jerky, uneven motions. Someone was in trouble. Lucy tugged at his sleeve, her voice filled with concern. "They need help, Daddy." Caleb hesitated, his jaw tightening. He needed to save what little he had left. But then he looked down at Lucy, at the hope still shining in her eyes, and he knew he couldn't turn away. "Yeah, baby girl," he said quietly. "Let's go see." They walked toward the approaching wagon, the heat radiating off the ground in visible waves. As they got closer, Caleb could see the problem. The rear wheel had splintered, several spokes broken clean through, causing the wagon to drag at a dangerous angle. The horses were agitated, stamping and snorting as a woman tried to control them from the driver's seat. She was dressed well, too well for someone to be out here alone. A deep green riding coat, leather gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days after being battered by the wind. Her face was flushed with frustration and heat, strands of auburn hair escaping from beneath her hat as she wrestled with the reins. When she saw Caleb and Lucy approaching, her hand instinctively moved to something beneath the seat. Caleb saw the glint of metal, a rifle. He stopped immediately, raising both hands slightly. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice steady and non-threatening. "Looks like you've got wheel trouble. We can help if you need it." The woman's eyes swept over him, taking in his ragged clothes, the dirt under his fingernails, the hollow look of a man who hadn't eaten well in weeks. Her grip on the rifle didn't loosen. "I don't need help from strangers," she said curtly. "I called roadside assistant, but they're taking forever, and I have a meeting I can change it," Darius interrupted. Not interested in her. Explanations he'd seen that look before. Felt that hesitation. He knew how this worked. She didn't trust him, but she also didn't have another option. The woman blinked, caught off guard. "Are you sure it's pouring?" And Yori glanced at Ariella. "Your daughter?" "Sheck be fine," Darius said, evenly, rolling up his sleeves. "I've done this 100 times, Ariel beamed, stepping forward to hold the umbrella over her father as he crouched beside the car. "My daddy's really good at fixing things," she said cheerfully, directing the comment at the woman. "He says kindness is free, so we should share it with everyone." The woman let out a small, almost reluctant chuckle. But Darius didn't look up. He worked quickly, muscles moving on, instinct despite the rain numbing his fingers. The whole process took less than 15 minutes. Caleb nodded slowly. "Understood, ma'am. But that wheel's not going to hold much longer, and this heat." He glanced at the sun, now past its peak, but still brutal. "You could be waiting a while." Lucy stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the tension. "My daddy's real good at fixing things. He fixed our whole wagon by himself when the axle broke." The woman's expression softened slightly as she looked at Lucy, but suspicion still lingered in her eyes. She glanced back at Caleb, then at the damaged wheel, then at the empty horizon where no help was coming. Finally, she let out a sharp breath and released her grip on the rifle. "Fine," she said, climbing down from the wagon with practiced ease. "But make it quick." Caleb didn't waste time. He circled the wagon, assessing the damage. 3 spokes were completely shattered, and the iron rim had bent slightly from the impact. It was fixable, but it would take precision and time, 2 things he didn't have much of. He'd need to remove the wheel, splice in temporary supports, and reinforce it enough to get her wherever she was going. "Lucy, can you fetch my toolbox?" he asked. Lucy nodded eagerly and ran back toward their camp. The woman watched her go, then turned to Caleb. "That's a long walk for a little girl." "She's tougher than she looks," Caleb replied, kneeling beside the wheel. "Lost her mother a few weeks back. She's handling it better than I am." The words came out before he could stop them, and he immediately regretted the overshare. He didn't need this stranger's pity, but the woman didn't offer any. She just nodded quietly, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment, and it sounded genuine. Caleb didn't respond. He focused on the wheel, running his hands over the damage. Lucy returned quickly, lugging the toolbox with both hands. Caleb took it and got to work, his movements deliberate and efficient, despite the shaking in his hands from hunger and exhaustion. The woman stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You do this for a living?" she asked. "Used to be a carpenter," Caleb said, not looking up. "Built homes, barns, furniture. Now I just do what I can." "And what brought you out here?" Caleb paused, hammer in mid-swing. He didn't owe her his story, but something about the way she asked, direct, without judgment, made him answer. "Bad luck. Lost everything. Now we're just trying to survive." The woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Survival's harder than most people think." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb agreed. "It is." He worked in silence after that, sweat dripping from his face, as he carefully reinforced the wheel with strips of leather and wooden splints from his toolbox. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. After nearly 30 minutes, he stood and wiped his hands on his pants. "That should get you where you're going," he said. "Just don't push the horses too hard." The woman inspected his work, running her gloved hand along the repair. She looked impressed. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a leather coin purse. "How much do I owe you?" Caleb hesitated. He needed the money desperately, but something in him, pride, stubbornness, or maybe just exhaustion, made him shake his head. "Nothing, ma'am. Just glad we could help." The woman stared at him, her hand still holding the coin purse. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak, just studied him with those sharp, calculating eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too much of the world to be easily fooled. "Nothing?" she repeated, her tone caught between disbelief and something else. Suspicion, maybe, or curiosity. "Nothing," Caleb confirmed. He could feel Lucy's small hand slip into his, squeezing gently. "We were just passing by. Seemed like the right thing to do." The woman's jaw tightened. She glanced down at Lucy, then back at Caleb, her gaze lingering on his worn boots, the frayed edges of his shirt, the toolbox that looked like it had survived a war. "A man in your position doesn't turn down money," she said flatly. "Not unless he's got something to prove." Caleb felt a flicker of irritation, but pushed it down. "I'm not trying to prove anything, ma'am. I've got my hands, I've got my skills, and I've got my daughter. That's enough." "Is it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Before Caleb could respond, the woman closed the coin purse and tucked it back into her coat. Instead, she reached into a different pocket and pulled out a small card, cream-colored with elegant lettering embossed on the front. She held it out to him. Caleb took it hesitantly. The card was heavier than he expected, made of quality stock that cost more than most people in Dust Creek saw in a month. He read the name aloud without thinking. Catherine Whitmore, Whitmore Ranch. His stomach dropped. Everyone in the territory knew the name Whitmore. The Whitmore Ranch was the largest cattle operation for hundreds of miles, a sprawling empire of land, livestock, and influence. Catherine Whitmore wasn't just wealthy, she was powerful, the kind of powerful that could make or break entire towns with a single decision. Caleb had heard stories about her, a woman who'd inherited the ranch from her father and turned it into something even bigger, who ran her business with an iron will and didn't suffer fools. And he just refused her money. Lucy looked up at him, eyes wide. "Daddy, is she famous?" Catherine's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Something like that." Caleb handed the card back, but Catherine shook her head. "Keep it," she said. "You might need it. I don't think—" "I'm not offering charity," Catherine interrupted, her voice sharp but not unkind. "I'm offering opportunity. If you're half as good at carpentry as you are at fixing wagon wheels, I could use someone like you at the ranch. We've got barns that need reinforcing, fences that need mending, bunkhouses that are falling apart. My foreman's been complaining about it for months." Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. A job, a real job, the kind that could mean steady pay, a roof over Lucy's head, maybe even a future. But he'd been burned before by promises that sounded too good to be true. "Why?" he asked. "You don't know me. You don't know if I'm any good." Catherine gestured toward the repaired wheel. "I know enough, and I don't make offers I don't mean." She climbed back onto the wagon, gathering the reins. "Think about it. If you're interested, come by the ranch. Ask for me specifically." Caleb opened his mouth to respond, but Catherine had already snapped the reins. The horses lurched forward, and the wagon began to roll, the repaired wheel holding steady as it moved down the trail. Lucy waved enthusiastically. "Bye, Miss Whitmore." Catherine glanced back just once, her expression unreadable, before disappearing into a cloud of dust. Caleb stood there, card in hand, watching until the wagon was nothing but a speck on the horizon. His mind raced with possibilities, doubts, and a cautious, fragile thing he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. "Daddy," Lucy tugged at his sleeve, "are we going to go to her ranch?" Caleb looked down at the card again, running his thumb over the embossed lettering, Catherine Whitmore. A woman who could change their lives with a single word, or crush them just as easily. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said quietly. "I don't know." But deep down, he knew he didn't have a choice. This was the only opportunity he'd had in months, maybe the only one he'd get. And if there was even a chance it could give Lucy the life she deserved, he had to take it, even if it terrified him. 3 days passed, and Caleb didn't go to the ranch. He told himself he needed time to think, to plan, to make sure Lucy was settled before making any decisions. But the truth was simpler and far more bitter. He was afraid of walking onto that ranch and being turned away at the gate, afraid of being laughed at by men who had steady work and full bellies, afraid that Catherine Whitmore's offer had been nothing more than a polite gesture she'd already forgotten. So he stayed at the camp by the dried creek bed, and things got worse. The crack in their wagon wheel finally gave out completely on the second day. Caleb had been moving the wagon to a shadier spot when he heard the sickening snap of wood, and the whole thing collapsed onto its side, spilling what few belongings they had into the dust. He'd spent hours trying to fix it with scraps and rope, but without proper materials it was useless. The wagon was dead. That night, Lucy didn't complain when he told her they'd have to sleep under the stars. She just curled up against him, using his jacket as a blanket, and fell asleep while he stared at the endless sky above them. On the third day, the money ran out. Caleb had walked into Dust Creek that morning with his last $1.50, hoping to buy enough cornmeal and salt pork to last them a few more days. But prices had gone up. The general store owner blamed it on a delayed supply wagon, and what he could afford wouldn't feed them for more than 2 meals. He stood at the counter, staring at the meager supplies, feeling the weight of every decision pressing down on him. Behind him, a group of ranch hands laughed loudly, throwing coins on the counter for whiskey and tobacco like money meant nothing. One of them glanced at Caleb and sneered. "You lost, drifter?" Caleb didn't respond. He paid for the cornmeal and left. When he returned to camp, Lucy was sitting exactly where he'd left her, waiting with that patient, heartbreaking trust she always had. He built a small fire and cooked the cornmeal into a thin, flavorless mush. They ate in silence, and when Lucy asked if there would be more for dinner, he lied and told her yes. That night, hunger gnawed at him like an animal. He lay awake, listening to Lucy's soft breathing, and tried to figure out what to do next. He could try the lumber yard again, but they'd already turned him away twice. He could offer to chop wood or haul water, but most folks in Dust Creek took care of their own work or had family to help. There was no place for him here, no place for them. He pulled Catherine Whitmore's card from his pocket and held it up to the moonlight. The embossed letters seemed to mock him. Whitmore Ranch, a place of wealth and power and opportunity, everything he wasn't. What if he showed up and she didn't remember him? What if her foreman took one look at him and sent him packing? What if he dragged Lucy all that way for nothing? But what if he didn't go? He looked over at his daughter, her small body curled up under his jacket, her face peaceful in sleep despite everything. She trusted him. She believed he would take care of her, that he would find a way, and he was failing her. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd been so afraid of rejection, so paralyzed by pride and fear that he'd let them sink deeper into desperation. He'd wasted 3 days, 3 days they didn't have, because he was too proud to ask for help. Caleb clenched the card in his fist, his jaw tightening with determination. Tomorrow he would go to the ranch. He would walk through those gates, hat in hand if he had to, and he would beg Catherine Whitmore for that job. Because Lucy deserved better than this. She deserved a home, food, safety, everything he couldn't give her right now, and if that meant swallowing his pride, then so be it. He tucked the card back into his pocket, lay down beside Lucy, and closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it finally did, it carried with it a fragile, desperate hope. Tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another. The walk to Whitmore Ranch took most of the morning. Caleb carried Lucy on his shoulders for the first mile. But when the sun climbed higher and the heat became unbearable, he set her down, and they walked hand in hand along the dusty road. His stomach was empty, his legs ached, and doubt whispered in his ear with every step. But he kept moving forward, because turning back now meant admitting defeat. When they finally crested the ridge overlooking the valley, Caleb stopped in his tracks. The Whitmore Ranch stretched out before them like something from a dream. Endless pastures dotted with cattle, sturdy wooden fences running for miles, barns and stables built with precision and care. In the distance stood the main house, a sprawling 2-story structure with a wide porch and whitewashed walls that gleamed in the sunlight. This wasn't just a ranch, it was an empire. Lucy's mouth hung open. "Daddy's, it's so big." Caleb swallowed hard. "Yeah, baby girl, it is." They descended the ridge and approached the main gate, where 2 ranch hands stood watch. One of them, a lean man with a sun-darkened face and a rifle slung over his shoulder, stepped forward as they approached. "Help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear they weren't welcome. Caleb pulled out Catherine's card, holding it up. "I'm here to see Miss Whitmore. She told me to come by." The ranch hand took the card, examined it with suspicion, then exchanged a glance with his companion. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared through the gate. Caleb and Lucy stood in the shade of a cottonwood tree, waiting. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Lucy leaned against him, her head resting on his hip, and he could feel her exhaustion. He should have brought water. He should have planned better. Finally, the gate swung open, and the ranch hand returned. "Miss Whitmore says to come in. Follow me." They walked through the gate and into a world that felt entirely foreign. Ranch hands moved with purpose, mending fences, training horses, hauling supplies. Everything was organized, efficient, thriving. Caleb felt like an intruder, a ghost passing through a life he'd never be part of. They were led to a large barn near the main house, where Catherine Whitmore stood speaking with a tall, broad-shouldered man in a leather vest. When she saw Caleb, she dismissed the man with a wave and walked toward them. "Mr. Morgan," she said, and there was something in her tone, recognition, maybe even approval. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I," Caleb admitted. Catherine's gaze dropped to Lucy, and her expression softened slightly. "And you brought your daughter." "Didn't have anywhere else to leave her, ma'am." Catherine nodded as if she understood. She crouched down to Lucy's level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lucy," the girl said shyly. "Well, Lucy, there's a kitchen just over there, and I bet the cook has some fresh biscuits and milk. Would you like some?" Lucy's eyes widened, and she looked up at Caleb for permission. He hesitated, then nodded. A young woman appeared, as if summoned, and gently took Lucy's hand, leading her toward the main house. Once they were alone, Catherine straightened and fixed Caleb with that sharp, assessing stare. You took your time. I wasn't sure the offer was real, Caleb said honestly. I don't make offers I don't mean, Catherine replied. I need a carpenter. Someone who knows how to work with their hands and doesn't cut corners. My foreman's been complaining for months that half the structures on this ranch are falling apart, and I'm tired of hearing it. She paused. But I need to know you're serious. I can't have someone who's going to run off after a week. Caleb met her eyes. I've got nowhere else to go, Miss Whitmore. And I'll work harder than anyone you've got here. I promise you that. Catherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. You'll start tomorrow. I'll have one of the bunkhouses cleared for you and Lucy. Meals are provided, and you'll earn $2 a day to start. After a month, if you prove yourself, we'll talk about something more permanent. $2 a day, steady work, a roof over their heads. Caleb's throat tightened. Thank you, ma'am. You won't regret this. Catherine's expression remained unreadable. We'll see, she said. Then she turned and called toward the barn. Hayes, get over here. The broad-shouldered man from earlier approached, his expression cold and unwelcoming. Catherine gestured toward Caleb. This is Caleb Morgan. He's our new carpenter. Get him set up in bunkhouse 3 and show him what needs fixing. Garrett Hayes looked Caleb up and down with barely concealed disdain. Yes, ma'am, he said flatly. Catherine walked away without another word, leaving Caleb standing face to face with a man who clearly didn't want him there. Hayes spat into the dirt. Let's get one thing straight, Drifter. I don't care what Miss Whitmore says. You screw up once, and you're gone. Caleb didn't flinch. Understood. Hayes turned and walked toward the bunkhouses. Caleb followed, his heart pounding. He was in. But the real test was just beginning. The first week at Whitmore Ranch was harder than anything Caleb had endured on the road. Garrett Hayes made sure of it. From the moment Caleb arrived, Hayes had made his position clear. Drifters didn't belong on the ranch, and no amount of Catherine Whitmore's favor would change that. He assigned Caleb the worst jobs, repairing rotted fence posts in the blazing sun, replacing warped boards on the cattle pens, while aggressive steers snorted and charged at the railings, reinforcing the roof of a storage shed that was half collapsed and infested with wasps. Caleb didn't complain. He showed up before dawn, worked until his hands bled, and never asked for breaks. Lucy stayed in the small room they'd been given in the bunkhouse, occupying herself with drawings and stories, while the ranch cook, a kind older woman named Martha, kept an eye on her during the day. The other ranch hands kept their distance at first, watching him with cautious curiosity, but slowly, as the days passed and Caleb's work spoke for itself, some of them began to nod in acknowledgement when he passed. A few even offered advice or lent him tools when Hayes wasn't looking, but Hayes noticed, and he didn't like it. It was on the 8th day that things came to a head. Caleb had been tasked with reinforcing the main barn's loft, a crucial repair, as the structure was used to store hay for the winter. He'd spent 2 full days measuring, cutting, and fitting new support beams, working with the precision of a man who'd built barns 100 times before. The work was solid, clean, and built to last. But when Hayes inspected it that afternoon, his face twisted into a scowl. "This isn't right," Hayes said loudly, loud enough for the other men to hear. He pointed at one of the beams. "This joint's unstable. Whole thing could collapse under weight." Caleb frowned, stepping closer. "That joint's secure. I doubled the bracing and used mortise and tenon." "I don't care what fancy terms you use, Drifter," Hayes interrupted. "I'm telling you it's not safe." He turned to the gathered ranch hands. "Tear it down." "We'll have to start over." A murmur ran through the men. One of them, a grizzled hand named Eli, spoke up. "Garrett, that looks like solid work to me." "Did I ask for your opinion?" Hayes snapped. Caleb's jaw clenched. He could feel the anger rising in his chest, the urge to grab Hayes by his vest and tell him exactly what he thought. But he'd been here before. Confrontations with men in power never ended well for people like him. If he lost his temper, he'd lose everything. So instead, he took a slow breath and said evenly, "If you think there's a problem, let Miss Whitmore inspect it. She'll know if it's sound." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "You calling me incompetent?" "I'm saying let the boss decide." The tension hung in the air like a drawn bowstring. For a moment, Caleb thought Hayes might take a swing at him, but then a voice cut through the silence. "That won't be necessary." Everyone turned. Catherine Whitmore stood at the barn entrance, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She'd clearly been there long enough to hear the exchange. She walked past Hayes without a word and climbed the ladder to the loft. The men watched in silence as she examined Caleb's work, running her hands over the joints, testing the stability of the beams, checking the alignment. After a long moment, she climbed back down. "The work is excellent," she said simply. "Better than anything we've had done in the past year." She turned to Hayes. "Leave it as it is." Hayes's face flushed red, but he nodded stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." Catherine's gaze shifted to Caleb, and for the briefest moment, something passed between them. An acknowledgement, perhaps, or a warning. Then she turned and walked out of the barn, leaving Hayes standing there, humiliated in front of his men. Caleb didn't gloat. He didn't say a word. He just picked up his tools and got back to work. But as he climbed back into the loft, he caught Eli's eye. The older ranch hand gave him a small nod of respect. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That night, as Caleb lay in his bunk with Lucy asleep beside him, he stared at the ceiling and thought about what had just happened. Hayes wouldn't let this go. Men like him never did. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time since Sarah died, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt like he belonged somewhere, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away. The month passed faster than Caleb expected. He rebuilt 3 fences, repaired 2 bunkhouses, reinforced the main stable, and constructed a new storage shed that the ranch hands said was the sturdiest building on the property. His hands were calloused and scarred, his back ached constantly, but every night when he returned to the bunkhouse and saw Lucy smiling, actually smiling, it was worth it. She'd changed in those weeks. Her cheeks had filled out from regular meals. She laughed more. She'd even made friends with some of the ranch hands' children who lived in the workers' quarters. For the first time since losing Sarah, Caleb saw glimpses of the carefree child she used to be. Hayes had grown quieter after the barn incident, though his resentment simmered just beneath the surface. He no longer openly challenged Caleb's work, but he watched, always watching, waiting for a mistake that never came. On the last day of the month, Catherine summoned Caleb to the main house. He walked up the porch steps, hat in hand, feeling oddly nervous. Through the windows, he could see the interior: polished wood floors, elegant furniture, paintings on the walls. It was a world he didn't belong to, and yet here he was, about to step inside. A housekeeper led him to Catherine's study, a room lined with books and maps of the territory. Catherine sat behind a large oak desk, reviewing papers. She gestured to a chair across from her. "Sit." Caleb sat, placing his hat on his knee. Catherine set down her pen and leaned back, studying him with that same sharp gaze she'd had the day they met. "Your month is up, Mr. Morgan." "Yes, ma'am. I've received reports from Hayes and the other hands. Your work has been exceptional." She paused. Hayes tried to find fault with it. He couldn't. Caleb didn't respond. He just waited. Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out over the ranch. "I'm offering you a permanent position. $3 a day, full room and board for you and Lucy. You'll oversee all carpentry and construction on the ranch. Report directly to me, not Hayes." Caleb's breath caught. $3 a day. That was more than he'd made even in his best years as a carpenter. I don't know what to say, ma'am." "Say yes or no," Catherine replied simply. "Yes," Caleb said without hesitation. "Yes, ma'am." Thank you. Catherine turned to face him, her expression softening slightly. Don't thank me yet. This isn't charity, Mr. Morgan. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you. I know that. Do you? She walked back to her desk but didn't sit. Instead, she leaned against it, arms crossed. When I met you on that trail, I saw something in you. Not desperation. I see that every day. I saw dignity. You refused my money when you clearly needed it. You helped me without expecting anything in return. That's rare. She paused, and for the first time, Caleb saw something vulnerable in her expression. My father built this ranch from nothing, she continued quietly. He was a carpenter just like you. Worked his hands to the bone, got laughed at by men who thought they were better than him just because they'd been here longer. But he never quit. He earned every inch of this land through sheer will and hard work. Her voice grew softer. He died 10 years ago. Heart gave out while he was repairing a fence. Caleb's throat tightened. I'm sorry, ma'am. Catherine nodded. When I saw you fixing that wagon wheel, refusing payment, working with pride even though you had nothing, you reminded me of him. That's why I gave you this chance. Not because I pitied you, but because I recognized something I thought was dying out in this territory, integrity. She straightened, her usual businesslike demeanor returning. But here's the truth, Mr. Morgan. Men like my father, men like you shouldn't have to rely on chance encounters with people like me to get opportunities. The fact that you do says more about this world than it does about you. Caleb met her eyes. It's not fair. No, Catherine agreed. It's not. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of that truth hanging between them. Finally, Catherine extended her hand. Welcome to Whitmore Ranch, Mr. Morgan. Permanently. Caleb shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. I won't let you down, ma'am. I know you won't, Catherine said, because if you do, I'll fire you myself. Despite everything, Caleb smiled, understood. As he left the study and walked back across the ranch grounds, the evening sun casting long shadows across the land, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years, security, not just for himself, but for Lucy. They had a home now, a real home, and he'd earned it. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. Caleb stood outside the newly built workshop, his workshop, wiping sawdust from his hands, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The structure was solid, built with his own hands on land that now felt like home. Inside, his tools hung neatly on the walls, organized and cared for. No longer a battered collection of scraps, but a proper craftsman's arsenal, earned through honest work. Lucy came running across the yard, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. She wore a new dress, simple but clean, and her hair was braided with a ribbon Martha had given her. She looked healthy. She looked happy. Daddy, Daddy, look what I made. She held up a small wooden horse, crudely carved but full of character. One of the ranch hands had been teaching her to whittle. Caleb crouched down, taking the horse and examining it with exaggerated seriousness. Now that's fine craftsmanship, Miss Lucy. Your grandfather would have been proud. Lucy beamed, throwing her arms around his neck. Do you think Mama can see us? Do you think she knows we're okay now? Caleb pulled her close, his throat tightening. Yeah, baby girl. I think she knows, and I think she's real proud of you. They stood there for a moment, father and daughter, silhouetted against the setting sun. Then Lucy pulled back, her expression turning excited. Miss Catherine said I can start school in town next month, with the other kids. I know, Caleb said, smiling. We'll get you all set up. Lucy hugged him once more, then ran off to show Martha her wooden horse, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts. He looked out across the ranch, the fences he'd repaired, the buildings he'd rebuilt, the land that had given him a second chance. Hayes had eventually left the ranch 3 months ago, unable to stomach taking orders from a man he'd tried so hard to break. The other hands had thrown Caleb a small celebration when they heard the news. Footsteps approached from behind. Caleb turned to see Catherine walking toward him, her usual commanding presence softened slightly by the evening light. "Admiring your work?" she asked. "Just thinking," Caleb replied. Catherine stood beside him, looking out at the same view. "You've done well here, Mr. Morgan. Better than I expected, if I'm being honest. I appreciate the opportunity, ma'am. More than you know. I told you before it wasn't charity." Catherine's voice was firm. "You earned this, every bit of it. But I want you to understand something." She turned to face him. "What happened between us, that chance meeting on the trail, it shouldn't be the only way men like you get ahead. The fact that you needed someone like me to notice you, to give you a chance, that's the problem." Caleb nodded slowly. "I've thought about that too. I can't change the whole territory," Catherine continued, "but I can change how things work here. I've been thinking about opening up more positions for men who are struggling, who just need someone to believe in them, men with families, with skills, who've been overlooked." She paused. "I'd like your help with that, identifying people who deserve a chance." Caleb looked at her surprised. "You want me to help hire people?" "You know what it's like to be on the other side of that fence," Catherine said simply. "You'll see things I can't. You'll recognize the people worth investing in." A warmth spread through Caleb's chest. Not just gratitude, but purpose. "I'd be honored, ma'am." Catherine nodded, satisfied. "Good. We start next month." As she walked away, Caleb turned back to watch Lucy playing in the yard, her laughter echoing across the ranch. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, desperate, broken, sleeping under the stars with nothing but hope and determination. And he thought about the man he was now, still imperfect, still learning, but stable, secure, a father who could provide for his daughter. The road had been hard. The journey had been painful. But standing here now, watching his daughter play in the fading light, Caleb understood something fundamental. Kindness wasn't just about giving or receiving. It was about recognizing the humanity in others, about seeing potential where others saw only problems. He'd helped a stranger fix a wagon wheel, expecting nothing in return. And that simple act of decency had changed everything. Not because Catherine Whitmore was rich, not because he'd gotten lucky, but because he'd refused to let desperation strip away his character, and someone had noticed. That was the lesson. That was what mattered. Caleb picked up his tools, secured the workshop, and walked toward the bunkhouse where Lucy was waiting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new opportunities to prove himself. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he could simply rest. He was home. If this story touched your heart, share where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage, kindness, and second chances that remind us all of the power of human decency.